Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Our second session is titled Civil Societies as a Force for Stability and Progress in an Increasingly Turbulent World. This session will be moderated by Step Vasson, Senior International Correspondent for Al Jazeera Network. Without further ado, Step, the screen is yours.
I hope everyone can hear me now. My name is Step Vaas and I'm a correspondent for Al Jazeera English. I'm at the moment talking to you from Amsterdam. I'm based here in Europe. I've been living and working from Indonesia for more than 20 years. Moved to Russia, worked there as a correspondent for Al Jazeera English, went to Berlin, and now I'm here in Amsterdam. We're talking about a very important topic, the future basically of civil societies and how they are facing the most extreme challenges in a long time. Are we at a crossroads? We have seen in the last year, many uprisings all over the globe, actually. We have seen Gen Z protests in Nepal, in Morocco, in several countries, in Madagascar. And we also have seen how many of these movements have been repressed. We've seen how civil organizations are challenged by funding cuts. So we're going to discuss all of this with very prominent speakers, I have to say, and I'm very honored actually to moderate this session because we have some real heroes here talking to you today from different parts of the world. And let me introduce them to you. We have first, we have 4 speakers who will speak to you for a few minutes, but then in the second part of this session, we will have also discussants from other parts of the world as well. And at the end of this session, everyone, of course, can also ask their questions. So let me first introduce the first speaker. He is talking to us from Paris, Justin Weiss. He's the founder and also Director General of the Paris Peace Forum, and it's an annual event discussing the most prominent challenges in geopolitics. It's actually an organization set up by, at the request of the French president, Emmanuel Macron. Our second speaker is speaking to us from Johannesburg. His name is Arthur Larocque. He's the Secretary General of Action Aid International, which works from 46 countries. He has worked in civil society for nearly 2 decades. He has been at the forefront of repression. His office has been closed. There's been arrests, funding cuts. So he has really this frontline experience. Then we speak to Pita Limjanroenrat, who speaks to us from Vancouver. It's very late there. He is the almost prime minister of Thailand. He wrote a book about it, but instead of becoming the prime minister of Thailand, he is banned from politics for the next 10 years and is now a visiting senior democracy fellow at Harvard University. Then from New Delhi, we have Suhasini Haidar, and she is a fellow journalist and a diplomatic editor of The Hindu, one of the oldest, very old, from 1878, I think, and largest newspaper in India. And she will talk to us about the role of press freedom and also how to shape civil engagement and trust. So we want to start with Justin first. And the question is basically, Justin, what are the main challenges? I'm already speaking about the things we've seen. We have seen funding cuts, repression, but a lot of confrontations as well. How do you see the main challenges at the moment?
Hi, everyone. Really glad to be taking part. Thank you, Steph, for your question. I will probably take advantage of the fact that I'm the first speaker to sort of take a broader step. There are times in history when democracy is in the rise, when civil societies have more space to express themselves. And there are times in history when authoritarian tendencies win. Think the 1930s, for example, or when you had fascist regimes gaining not just in Germany and and Italy and militarist regime in Japan, etc., but also in other democracies, these tendencies were winning. Or think the communist regimes in the 1950s. But then democracy re-expanded, I would say, in the 70s. It's called the third wave. And then during the time of globalization in the 1990s and 2000, you had quite some space for what we know today and which is in danger, which is a large expression of civil society. We've seen a really stark regression, a recession, a democratic recession in the past 10, 15 years, with increasing authoritarian tendencies that we've seen in different countries, whether they are in authoritarian regimes themselves or they are in democracies, sometimes sort of captured democracies or illiberal democracies. And so that's the world we live in now. The reasons for that are many. At the recent edition of the Paris Peace Forum 2 weeks ago, that was in late October, we had several sessions on the civic space and civic mobilization. Speakers pointed actually to two discrete variables, we call them in political science, or two discrete reasons for which democracy and the civic space are in danger. One was inequalities and the sort of infrastructure, the social infrastructure, socioeconomic infrastructure of our political societies. And the second one is the digital space and the capture of the digital space, either by a few actors or by government themselves. And so and I will finish with that. In terms of remedies, in terms of what can be done, we also had at the last edition of the Paris Peace Forum a really important set of sessions around media. That's one of the ways in which the civic space can prosper, is independent media. If you don't know the facts, if a common truth is not established, then it's very, very difficult to argue, to push back on authoritarian tendencies. And so we had a meeting of IFPIM, the International Fund for Public Interest Media, that reconstituted its funding, and it's supporting independent media all around the world. They collected 10 million euros from France and many other promises of funding from other countries. Ghana was the co-sponsor of that meeting, and itself was the first African country to commit to supporting IFPIM. And we had several other sessions, but I don't want to speak for too long. So I think we are in a difficult moment, and that's true worldwide. The evolutions, of course, in the United States are very worrying, both internally and externally. Internally, because they put in question the traditional role of the checks and balances, of the free press, etc. And externally, because they are no longer supporting a number of institutions which used to benefit from that support, and that's probably not a very good news for democracy. I'll stop here, but thank you for the invitation, and I'm looking forward to discussing with my colleagues.
Thanks, Justin, for your input. And yeah, we, of course, have seen in Europe the rise of far-right parties, and you have that experience in France as well. And it's maybe something we can discuss later, because there's a lot of undemocratic elements to that, and the situation in France and Germany. It's very interesting to discuss maybe later. But we're going to move now to Johannesburg, to Arthur. I was listening to a podcast you did, and the keywords that were standing out when I was listening to you was courage and conviction. You have really needed both of these characteristics, right? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Lovely to join all of you. So ActionAid is an ecosystem of about 3,100 staff around the world, 3,600 partners and collaborations in about 74 countries, 47 where we are physically present, and then an extra 26 where we work through different collaborations and partnerships. So I think on this first question about the big trends, I think first of all, we need to unpack the nature of civil society because it's not an homogeneous group. So, and therefore, they are affected differently by what is happening in the world. In some cases, spaces is expanding. In others, it's shrinking. So, I think that I see three major trends. The first one is a worrying one, which is one in which, in response to the very grim picture that has been set of rising authoritarianism, fascism, and all these kinds of isms that are undermining people's dignity, civil society is adjusting to the problem, not solving it, but adjusting to the problem to survive. So it is a survival trend. We restructure because of funding problems. We adopt certain language that are in vogue. And unfortunately, this fragments us and doesn't help us to solve the problem. In this regard, I think that, reports like the Net Hope report of 2025 suggest that nonprofits are, the fourth largest, the fourth most attacked sector in development. Another report suggests that cyber attacks have increased by 241%. So in response to that, there's a natural trend to try to survive rather than to try to push back. The second trend I see, which is a lot more hopeful, is one in which we see a lot more, non-traditional civil society organizations, some of them not really organized in organizational forms that you can attack. It's a very promising one in which young people are expanding spaces that they did not occupy before, on the streets of Kenya, of Madagascar, Bangladesh, Nepal, and others. I see that happening a lot more because of the disappointment, both in civil society, organized civil society, but also in governments and the international system. So I see a lot more protest movements emerging. Whether they will be successful in the long run is another question, but I think that's another major trend we need to be aware of. And then the third trend is an in-between one. It is a trend in which we see more organized and formalized organizations like ours seeking to transform, to be more aligned to people's movements, to be more supportive of young people that have the courage and determination to push back against the very system that is holding every one of us hostage. The challenge is that a lot of civil society organizations are part and parcel of the system, unfortunately. So we need to transform and align better with those that have the courage to push back and shift the system. Otherwise, the strategy that we adopt from the first trend, which is to survive, to reduce funding, to try to diversify, is not overcoming the primary drivers of the problem. It will make us survive for a while, but not for a long while. So I think that this is very, very important for us to ensure that we are not simply adjusting to the problem, but trying to transform and not be perpetually reactive to the situation. So I think this is the first impression I have about the three major trends that I see.
Thank you, Arthur. And I think you can also talk later maybe more about the concrete solutions, right? Because you, as probably nobody else here, has actually faced the challenges really directly, and you've managed to sail out of it. And I'm also really interested to hear about the Gen Z and also in Africa. What is that? Where is this coming from? And is this a different generation than previous generations? But before we're going to discuss all this, we're going to move to the next speaker now, Pita Lim Chandrunrat from Vancouver. He's going to talk to us about how to take lessons from democratic transitions and how to sail through a time of political turbulence. The floor is yours.
Yes, as a former politician from Thailand, I see four challenges that civil society is facing in times of turbulent like this. First is strategically. A lot of CSO, civil society groups, is being stigmatized as a foreign agent as radical, as extremist, as people who's trying to create chaos in the society because the states cannot solve problems and they can start thinking about how to influence rather, how to control rather. So that's the first issue that civil society is facing in democratic backsliding. Second is operationally. I think visa denials, the bureaucracy of the government making civil society registered and the extra accounting practices that CSOs in Thailand have to face have become quite a challenge. Financially, obviously, a lot of cuts come in from various walks of life, and that requires a lot of reorganization of the civil society group. And I think lastly is on technologically. I feel like there's a lot of information operation, misinformation, and disinformation that is trying to make sure that the CSO does not get to deliver the values and the contribution that they have for democracy. In the last few years, half of the billion of people of the entire world get to go to the election. However, the freedom of expression, whether you look at The Economist, whether you look at FIDEM, whether you look at the Freedom House, has been going down. So without a strong, resilient CSO groups, it'll be very hard for democracy to hold together as a whole. And I think that's enough from what I have to say. I'm returning the time back to other panelists. Thank you.
Well, you have still 2.5 minutes. That's why I have the opportunity to ask you a question, actually.
Sure.
Because looking at what happened to you, right, you were nearly the prime minister, and I think you really were still optimistic until the end, right, of your struggle to be able to make it. What exactly was the main key element that made it fail?
Repeat the question again. I almost understand, but please repeat the last question.
Yeah, what do you see? Because there was, of course, a lot of powers at play and
Yes.
the Constitutional Court and all that stuff.
Yes.
But what do you see is the main, if you would sum it up, basically, what would be the main enemy you had at the time?
Oh, so in Thailand, the summary of Thai politics is a generational clash between democratic aspirations and institutional conservatism. So people wanted change and voted for it, but the constitutional mechanism, whether it's the appointed senators appointed by the military junta, or judicial capture, or independent organizations, or media capture, have stopped the democratic aspirations of the people. But civic awakening happened during that time, and hopefully we can finally move beyond all these state capture that the bad elites have been trying to do.
But very clearly a generational gap.
Yes, a clash.
Clash, yeah, exactly. So the old versus the new.
Yes, exactly.
Old versus young.
It's an old consensus and new normal. So it's a new normal, new challenges, new way of doing things, but the old elites still want the old ways.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's something that will probably be a red line through all our conversations today, right? The clash for old versus new. So we're gonna go now to New Delhi, to Suhasini Haidar from the Hindu, and she's gonna talk about the role of us, of the press, in this whole debate. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and it's nice to be with all these global citizens today. So I'm going to actually differ a little bit from Arthur when he says you can't find a one size fits all, but because actually what we are all dealing with in different ways around the world, you have to somehow see the common threads that are coming together. To begin with, I'll just talk about the last 5 years since 2020. the entire world has seen the impacts of 5 shocks. Very quickly, that's the COVID pandemic, it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all the sanctions that followed that kind of led to a globally economic polarization. There's the Israel-Gaza war now, what we're seeing in Sudan, this brutalization and complete ineffectiveness, if you like, of global bodies when it comes to rules being broken, the rules-based order being broken. The tariff war that the US has now inflicted on the world and what we're seeing as the economic responses of that, and of course, climate shock, which we perhaps don't notice as carefully, but has already led to the first full year of a 1.5 degree rise. Why do I mention all of these? Because they come in a democratic context. So there are all these shocks. And what we're also seeing at the same time is the rise in the number of populist leaders and democracies turning to authoritarianism. Last year saw that, the numbers of autocracies were actually more than the numbers of democracies. Between 2016 and 2021, the number of countries moving towards authoritarianism doubled, was more than double, in fact, the number moving towards a democracy. And people are not happy with democracies. So what does this context of these shocks mean when it comes to these kind of movements? The first impact we're seeing, and I see it here where I stay in India, because we're in South Asia. I think somebody already mentioned that from Afghanistan, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal was the latest. We're seeing different movements, not necessarily purely democratic movements, overthrow governments. Whether it was a mob or a protest, a genuine protest, or it was the military junta, or what is called the establishment in each of these places, what they were overthrowing were elected governments that had gone through some rules and processes. What is the impact for the media? So I'll really come to your question now. I'm very quickly going to speak about 5 impacts, and later we can talk about how we need to address these challenges. But the 5 big challenges for the media as a result of this context I've just drawn for you. One is the authoritarian trends. Even if you're a full democracy, the governments in question who have been elected feel they are empowered to take full control of the narratives. Crackdowns we see on the opposition, on non-governmental organizations, and on the media in particular are not just, we see them in India, we see them in other countries as well. Even though these are popular governments, they do feel the need to stop the narrative that criticizes them. The second is the social media bypass. What we're seeing in technology, in terms of disinformation, in terms of artificial intelligence, what it's essentially saying is now that everybody has the tools to access the internet and information, you don't need the media anymore. You don't need a critical media that holds authority to account, that asks questions, that does research, that works on all these issues seriously. You can just, directly reach your constituents or put out your message or put out your disinformation and propaganda. The third are these shocks that I spoke about just now, are allowing people to feel comfortable giving up their own rights in favor of some kind of security, whether it's health security, food security, or strategic security. The fourth is the habits of the government rubbing off on people. People are becoming much more illiberal. Even in the street protests we've seen, dismissal, sense of the media. In the latest protest, we saw the Gen Z protests in Nepal. It was media organizations whose buildings were burnt. And the fifth is the degrading of all institutions, including the media, and a politicization that we see. So there's a polarization within our societies that leads to the idea that there is no one truth. We keep saying we're in that post-truth generation, and it is true because people feel that the truth is just what side of a political divide they're on. So these are the main challenges the media, I would say, here is feeling. But I speak when I exchange notes with my colleagues around the world, I hear very similar stories.
Thank you so much, Sohini. Yeah, that's absolutely right. We have the same experience here now in Europe as well. And as you say, the media is under attack as much as civil societies. I think we are sort of in a tandem together at the moment. If you look at what's happening with the authoritarian tendencies, regimes. So thank you so much for the first four speakers. It's all very super interesting and many leads to go on in a discussion later. But now I want to introduce the next set of speakers or discussants. We have Wolf Pamphile. He's the founder and executive director of the Haiti Policy House. He's speaking to us from Washington, D.C. We have from Lahore, Ikra Javed. She is the member of the board of experts of the Pakistan Research Center for Culture and Sustainable Future. And then from East Timor, Dili, Adelson da Costa Jr., strategy and engagement lead of Oxfam in Timor-Leste. And then we have from Geneva, Sanjay Sethi. He's the co-executive director of the Artistic Freedom Initiative in the US. And then from Jakarta, Tunggal Pawestri, director of Humanis Foundation, Indonesia. We'll start with Wolf, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Perfect. I think as we're all talking here, even with the first speakers, I could tell that we are all connected in a way that even the country that I cover, Haiti, it's halfway across the world from Indonesia, but I think even Thailand. But I think the same issues with regimes that existed for decades in the country, and also being country being overtaken by corruption and elites, and how it's keeping new and creative and innovative ideas from coming through and growing. Haiti Policy House is a research institute / think tank that focuses primarily on foreign policy that are impacting Haiti specifically. And today, Haiti is probably going through the worst humanitarian crisis in the Western Hemisphere. From Canada all the way down to Peru, I believe the situation in Haiti is impacting everybody. And as of this year, we have about 1.4 million people internally displaced within Haiti, that without counting the ones who are actually left the country. And also, we have about 90% of the country's capital being under gang control at the moment. And that's a result of decades of political elites and economic elites providing weapons and drugs to impoverished neighborhoods and using the youth as gangs for various reasons, suppressing votes, intimidation, extortion. And as 2 years ago, the situation erupted, and the gangs essentially took over because now they had too much power. And now we have people who are trapped within this 3 or 5 mile radius that is Port-au-Prince. And they control everything, and the police can't even get in there. And for us as a research institute, I mean, you can say it's probably in the greater scheme of things of civil society, creating a nonprofit or research institute right now with the financial situation of nonprofits, probably not the smartest idea. But at the same time, we also understand that this is something that must happen, and it doesn't matter the time. The time is never right, but you do have to go, you have to start, you have to get something going because the situation can be so dire. And what we've been working on recently has been understanding how somebody becomes a gang member, and what are the situations because at some point everyone was a 6-year-old or a 9-year-old that wanted to be a airplane pilot or a truck driver or a firefighter. But at some point in their life, something went wrong. And our work has been recently listening to music that's coming out of those territories, because essentially no one can go in there. No one can go in besides social media and TikTok. That is the only way to get information from there, and through their music. And we've been using that effectively to understand and to kind of like drive our research, and also see how we can come up with design creative policies that can impact those neighborhoods where those kids come from. And so far, we've been seeing some real interest in understanding from people who wouldn't normally listen to these kids are now paying attention to understand that, hey, this could be my cousin, this could be my brother or my sister. We've gotten some flags from that, from people who are not technically interested in what we're doing or who don't like that we're trying to find solutions for this for the current crisis that we're in. But I believe that, across the world, we are seeing similar trends as well. So,
thank you so much, Will, for this quite sobering contribution. A lot to take in. We're going now to Lahore, to Ikra. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm honored to be the part of this great panelist. I will be adding my point of view. Civil society always give a bridge between the state and the people, as we have seen that the things has been changed over the time, as one of the speakers mentioned about a generational gap and the Gen Z role in this arena, and the things the more focusing on would be the digital activism, which we have seen through the trends which is going all over the world. Right. Recently in Pakistan, through the in floods, we have seen the role of civil society and the way young people helped out and came for the real situations, right? So we should focus on to understand that gap which we see now, because somehow the young generation, the demand of they need the demand of the transparency, and they are the ones through which we can connect the civil society, and these young leaders can play the role. And the only thing which we should understand in that scenario, that their narratives, their ideas, and their way of interacting is so different as we compare to the ones who are already doing it. The medium of communication has been changed all over the world. So we should use these important platforms, and we should understand that how can we come up and help to connect these young generation to the real need of the community networks and the NGOs. Even though I just want to add the one example from Pakistan, one of my young student, he owned a society, and he is working and he's collecting funds and all that stuff on his own to just help out the society. So I believe that the things has been changed over the time, and we should be giving more transparency while it's come to media, and we more come up with an idea how can we connect these young leaders through use of AI or TikTok or any other platform, so that we can help them more in a very responsible way as well. Because one of the speaker mentioned disinformation and misinformation as well. Because when you have all of information around you, so you need to be very responsible while using that information. So we should aware more about in these regards. And because of flow of information also gives you that anxiety, and that will if we will focus on the transparency of the information, I think we can create the change.
Thank you so much, Ikra. And it's great that you mentioned the word connecting. And that's exactly, of course, what we're doing right now in this global town hall. But it's definitely a very good call for more interaction, more communication, and have more global interconnection. I think it's a great point. I'm going to move now to Delhi, to Adil's son. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for these great opportunities to be part of these conversations. It was an interesting guest speakers who is actually covering a lot of things from the global shift, which has happened in civic space issues, democracy, civil societies, and also youth engagement. So from my point of view, really want to push something in this conversation because in each country has different contexts and the way how civil society are engaged and contributing, whether into government policy decision-making process or support a society to be part of movement and creating space for them to contribute the ideas and perspective in the country development. So one critical things that I see in a change or shift of civic space when we are talking about legal and policy restriction, which is actually moving and reducing public participations to contribute in any development process. So since we see like a lot of change happen in terms of CSO or civil society engagement to contribute and change the narrative, which is basically not giving a potential opportunities for the most vulnerable people to participate and also contributing in the global shift that actually ongoing. I was think that this kind of opportunities and conversation could be bridge and sharing more perspective to see how change happen in each countries, and also bring a new lesson learned where each country can adapt or study things that maybe we can also contribute in our society. For Timor-Leste, I would say that our civic space is actually quite open, and we always have a room to have a conversation and also participating in political discourses, whether it's actually coming from civil society, media, or even vulnerable groups that living in the remote area. So I think that's some of the opportunities that the government in the country provide for people to contribute and also benefit from these opportunities to get a chance and also participating in any policy development for the benefit of those people in the country. So I think that's just more things that I just want to say and share in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adelson. East Timor is, of course, a very young democracy, and it's great to have your input on this. And also one important point you're making about the vulnerable groups and how they are represented in civil societies. I think that's an interesting point as well. We're going now to Geneva, to Sanjay, and yeah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to Global Voices and the FPCI for holding this important town hall. As the director of Artistic Freedom Initiative, an NGO dedicated to free artistic expression, oftentimes my function is to remind everyone of the role of arts in democracy, human rights, and the civic space. And when we talk about civil society, we often think of NGOs, advocacy networks, community groups, but the arts are one of the most important pillars in that ecosystem. Arts institutions, museums, galleries, theaters, film institutes, libraries are civil society, and artists themselves are civic actors. They shape public narratives, they open spaces for critical reflection, and they give voice to communities who are otherwise unheard. In my view, civil society and the arts intersect in three ways. One, both rely on independence from the state to question and critique. Both operate in the public sphere, shaping how societies understand themselves. And both safeguard pluralism, ensuring that multiple histories, identities, and futures can coexist. When the cultural life is undermined, it's not only the arts that weaken, the entire civic ecosystem loses its capacity to speak, imagine, and defend itself. And the way I see it, there's three key trends that AFI has seen over the last decade. And these trends actually track with some of the themes that have already been discussed this morning. I'm going to go to each one of them in turn, starting with the politicization of funding. So AFI across regions, we're witnessing the deliberate politicization of cultural funding. Grants that were once distributed by independent bodies are now tied to ideological conformity. Funds flow to projects that reinforce official state narratives, while institutions that present critical or minority perspectives are punished or defunded. This trend is unfolding in democratic, albeit illiberal countries such as Poland, under the prior regime, Hungary, and Slovakia, where cultural budgets have been reshaped to privilege a single national identity and marginalized dissent. We have seen these early stages in the United States right now, where arts defunding, ideological grant criteria, and political conditioning of cultural institutions are emerging as tools of control. The second trend we're seeing is anti-NGO and foreign agent laws. We see this really across the board and across region. These laws are framed as administrative oversight, but they function as instruments of political control and stigmatize independent organizations that receive support from abroad. And this is where that connection to point one becomes clearer. Once governments politicize and restrict public funding to the arts, independent organizations naturally turn to international foundations and partners, and then those partners become the next target. And these foreign agent laws are specifically designed to ensure that alternative sources of support dry up, completing this sort of two-step process. In the arts, this means fewer residencies, partnerships, and opportunities for artists and arts organizations. And then the last thing we're seeing is digital harassment, where artists and cultural workers increasingly face a hostile digital environment, coordinated online harassment, disinformation campaigns, algorithmic amplification of hate directed towards particular groups. And this form of suppression, in a way, is kind of faceless. I'm limited for time, so I'm happy to discuss later on what our strategy or coherent strategy is to build sort of cross-sector solidarity and the strengthening of independent and multilateral funding. But I think these are important next steps to sort of combat this alarming trend.
Thank you so much for this important input. Indeed, artists, of course, are very often at the forefront of change. And that's why it's very interesting and also chilling to hear under how much pressure they are operating right now and working. We're going to Jakarta now to hear from Tunggal. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Steph. I would like to agree actually with all of the important points mentioned earlier by the panelists and the discussants. It is very obvious that the authoritarian regime are really use their authoritarian playbook to slowly occupy the civic space. Therefore, in my opinion, we also need to develop a playbook, not to survive, like Arthur mentioned earlier, but more on to seriously tackling, being offensive, and being very assertive, tackling the authoritarian regime. And we also saw the rising of young people, Gen Z, and the early generations of Gen Alpha probably are taking and expanding the space using the unusual method and strategy that probably we need to learn more from them. But allow me to add a little bit, yeah. My organization conducted a research early this year related to civic space. We look at the threats that civil society actors are facing, map out their ecosystems and capacities, and develop strategy to support them. We gathered information from NGOs, activists, and some more progressive academics and also journalists. When we developed the research, we didn't want to assume that we are on the same page when we talk about civic space. Therefore, we asked again the civil society actors, and based on the interview, we arrived to these conclusions that it is not only about civic space, but also time that's shrinking. We found that the problem is not as simple as civic society actors losing their space and that we need to push back against autocratizations, but also we are losing substantial time and energy to do so. Perhaps this is our blind spot of the time dimension that has allowed autocrats to slowly enter and invade our civic space. So aside of tackling and emphasize the shrinking of various civic space, we propose we also need to pay attention to the limited time civil society actors have to engage with and maintain these spaces. What does it mean by the shrinking time? Civil society actors, including students, teachers, NGO workers, journalists, workers, educators, have to deal with daily responsibility, family, work, traffic jams in Jakarta, and also everyday civic issues like the arrest for protester Suharto becomes national hero, and etc. They are all distracting us. We are being distracted by many things in our life. We don't have 24 hours to effectively pushing back against autocratizations. So if the question is how are we redefining civil society ability to act freely and effectively, I think it is now to start thinking about care in the movement, a collective care. It's an action to taking shared responsibilities instead of being individualistic. So it's like starting from the beginning again, trying to understand the concept. So it's like trying to taking care of each other, challenge the system that doesn't allow us to trust and taking care of each other. It's an action to taking shared responsibilities instead of being individualistic. And then we also challenge the system that doesn't allow us to trust and taking care of each other, strengthen the people-to-people solidarity movement, like siblings movement or Milti Alliance, for example. It sounds probably lame, cheesy, non-progressive, but let's try. Perhaps that's the best way to redefine civil society's ability to act freely and effectively. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tunggal. This was a very fiery speech, and I like the word collective care, which brings me to the question, are you all exhausted? I mean, is it true? Is it true that civil society is under so much pressure that there is less and less people actually willing to be involved, willing to go out and risk? And I mean, is this what we're facing right now? And this brings me actually to the second phase now of this whole discussion, because we have painted and we've heard quite a bleak picture actually of the actual situation in all these countries around the globe, a lot of problems, repression, etc. But now we're moving to the point in this discussion is like, what can we do about it? And how important is civil society to, to defend democracy, to bring societies forward? And if I'm listening to Tunggal, it gets harder and harder with less people to do the work. I think more people are getting scared, they are withdrawing from the movements. So I want to ask Arthur first this question, like how important is and how crucial is civil society right now more than ever? And how are you going to make sure that it will survive, that there will be enough people to do the fighting? Did you hear me, Arthur?
Yes, I heard you, but I was muted. Sorry about that. So
Okay.
really, picking on what Tungal said, I really identify with all that she's mentioned. I think civil society is so important, but we need to understand that it needs to renew itself. It's not the same actors, same individuals having to fight. We are in a lifelong struggle. It's not time bound by projects or anything like that. And therefore, leaders will come, seasons will change, new people will emerge, and we need to identify with all of this evolution that is happening within civil society. So I think that just building on what Tungal also said about the system, we must not adjust and adapt to the problem, like I said earlier. Otherwise, we be perpetually reactive and somebody else sets the agenda. So we must fight back the system behind the massive shift we are seeing in funding, in funding for security and all of this. We must, join a global movement for peace, for instance. It's just unbelievable that the amount of money that is injected in warmongering, far supersedes efforts towards connecting people, and the like. So we must push back this. Otherwise, we must challenge the fear mongering that drives these investments in military and just realize that people can actually be connected and not be afraid of each other. Therefore, civil society matters most, not just to defend democratic values, but also to reimagine democracy itself. Because for a long time, a lot of the Gen Zs are disappointed with, elections take place, neoliberal democracy is happening and thriving in many places, but it's being used by the same autocrats to justify whatever they are doing. So they are actually popularly elected. So democracy is not delivering food on the table, it's not delivering food for Sudanese. And that's why they are on the street. So therefore, we must reimagine this democracy to start with, if we are to make, a big difference. And when we reimagine democratic values, we must emphasize as much social, cultural, and economic rights as we do political rights. Finally, civil society, especially the organizational forms, NGOs, international organizations, think tanks, and the like, that are also dependent on the same aid system that is responsible for so much problem. We must courageously and humbly rethink our own dependency. A lot of our structures are so aid dependent that we are so expensively run that we must reimagine how we are organized if we are to be effective. So for ourselves, we must reimagine organizational forms. And then for the mission, we must think creatively about the idea of generating resources to advance our mission. We must pay a little bit more attention to social enterprises and just rid ourselves of endless dependency that we have found ourselves in. So I think these are very, very important shifts that we need to make. So looking ahead, I think one, we must, as civil society, connect our struggles, and we must focus on the underlying system. No single civil society organization can push back on the system, and therefore we must collaborate, like Sanjay said earlier. Secondly, we must support social movements and authentic people's struggles, and not just think about our own survival as civil society because the law is against us, because funding is against us. People's civic space is ultimately about people's struggles, not just survival of organizations. And finally, we must find ways of speaking to the other side. We can't keep saying, oh, these fascists, these people on the must collaborate. Civil society must find ways of speaking to politicians, including those that we don't agree with. Otherwise, we remain in a bubble that cannot regenerate and cannot take us forward. So this is what I would suggest.
Thank you, Arthur. And who wants to respond? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Peter. Yes, you can hear me, right? Peter,
Yes,
Arthur is making a lot of very strong points here.
Right.
One of the things that he said in the beginning was we need to renew the movement all the time, right?
Yes.
That's also something you brought up. How
Yes.
how can you convince the younger generations to continue despite all the threats and the challenges that are being thrown at them? How do you do that? How do you renew and re-young the movement all the time?
I think advocates will have to do some advocacy for themselves to really explain why there's a need for a CSO in a democracy. The importance is to do check and balance, obviously, to do a lot of continuation of work because politicians come and go, governments come and go, but it's the CSOs that can continue the reform going forward. It's also about campaigning. If you can tell the younger generation the importance of having a CSO, I think it's much easier for you to maneuver within the system because one of the challenges that NGOs are facing that we did not mention in the first round is on the legal lawsuits. Strategic lawsuit against public participation is on the rise. So parliamentarians like myself need to amend the law so that there's a civic shield against advocacy work. But if you haven't renewed yourself, if you haven't advocate the right to exist, the right of existence of the NGOs, it'd be very hard for you to provide the check and balance to the state actors. You wouldn't be able to campaign and you wouldn't be able to collaborate going forward. So I think that's like the most important thing that you have to really strategize and explain to the majority of the society that you're not a foreign agent, that you're not as radical as what the government is trying to stigmatize. So finally, you have that kind of civic shield and the civic knowledge in order to move forward. I think the second thing you need to do is you need to rationalize, remain very positive on the core activities. But if it's about accounting, if it's about HR, if it's about administration work, you might have to consolidate on that front with various organizations so that you become more lean. And lastly, you have to digitize everything. You have to also fight for the digital space in the way you do advocacy and the way you do volunteer management and the way you organize as well. And that's how you could renew CSO within today's democracy.
Thank you, Peter, for the important input. I want to bring in Justin. What are your thoughts about this renewing of the movement and how to keep the spirit going?
Agree on the main points that were made. The digital space is absolutely key. And obviously with AI, we have a flooding of potentially very offensive chatbots and robots attacking. One point I wanted to bring to the discussion, because it's been said several times that the regression, the democratic regression and the recession in the civic space that we see in many countries is also made up of the apathy and the non-reaction of other people in society. I think polarization has a big role to play here. I mean, I'm sorry, I meant polarization is playing a big role in this story. We've seen, especially in the West, the gradual erasing of the center, of the middle, and society growing apart and not having any overlap. We saw that starting, especially in the US in the 1990s, and it only amplified in the decades since then. And we're seeing it in Europe. And of course, there are many reasons. I mentioned inequalities and the new digital environment or civilization in which we are, in which, as we know, we have bubbles of information in which we tend to stay and that tend to reinforce our beliefs. But I think we shouldn't hide the fact that a big part of the population, because it is polarized, has no patience for these movements. And so one of the big challenges is to try and reconstitute that precious, that vital middle in our polities and try and sort of reconstitute that the dialogue. Otherwise, the democracy defenders, the ones standing up for freedom and the civic space, etc., will be crushed without the participation of the I would say the other half. And so that's one important thing we should keep in mind.
Thank you, Justin. Now, we've just had the elections here in the Netherlands, and you saw in this result that especially the point you're making about the middle, people in the Netherlands voted now to go back to the middle and try to stay away from polarization. I mean, it's a very tiny step, but how do we achieve that? I want to bring in Suhasini. How do societies can prevent to be polarized? How do you keep the middle sane, basically?
I think what it requires, and I completely agree with Justin when he says it's necessary to try and bring back that middle space, that space when we were able to discuss issues, disagree with each other, and yet go away and part as friends or colleagues or partners. The world over, people are seeing the debilitating effects on society of this kind of polarization. And I think it's only a matter of time before it's seen as a societal issue. Years ago, there was this sense that people on their family groups and other groups were somehow finding themselves losing people they loved. How can we find a way to have these conversations in a way we actually are able to somehow relate to each other at the same time, not reject people, but reject our agreement with their ideas. It has to be done in a way that is conscious of the need to hold that middle ground. In the same way, I think it's necessary for us to have a recommitment to not just that middle ground, not just to civilized discourse amongst civil society. It is also necessary to walk away consciously from the idea of establishment versus anti-establishment, or the idea of a status quo versus the challengers. We have to move towards a place where we look for rules. We look for rules-based societies, societies based on constitutions, societies based on constitutional rights, freedoms, and perhaps also on some duties. But the idea must be, as the world progresses, not that we go back to the old lawless and might is right and almost tribal versions of our societies, but we work towards more rules-based societies. I know that sounds very ideological, but it begins with personal and individual and then group-wise commitments to these things. The second, and I think in the age of AI, and Peter and I were recently at a conference where we really, I think Peter was speaking about the idea that the third largest GDP in the world is now no longer a country. It is actually the 10 largest tech firms. We have, again, made it about them versus the rest. I think it's necessary to bring them on board and necessary to mobilize public opinion, because we know that does change them. Mobilize public opinion towards a push for authenticity. I'll give you 3 small examples that in the last, I would say, 5 years have incredibly changed the way social media, for example, functions for the positive. When WhatsApp, for example, stopped the unlimited forwarding of messages, because a lot of propaganda units were using these, whereas messages between 2 people are about a conversation, are about essentially a way of reaching out on a personal level. It changed the way that propaganda could be disseminated. I know in India, it made a huge difference. The second was Facebook's partial crackdown on hate speech, and the third was the search for authenticity in Twitter handles, or what became X eventually. Finally, I'll just say, and I heard that bell go off, that we need to understand that global values still matter. It is not possible for us, for example, in our part of the world to say, there is a Taliban regime that does not allow girls to go to school. That is not necessarily, that's not possible to just write off as a cultural difference between us and them. These are hard-fought values, hard-fought universal declarations that the world signed on to 80 years ago. We cannot dismiss them as a thing of the past. If the world committed to a rules-based order, committed to universal declarations of human rights, to child rights, to media freedoms, it is necessary to bring those back front and center without accepting this new version of the world.
Yeah, thank you so much. And also some useful, real concrete solutions, things that can be done. And I think that's where we're going to move to the third part. And that's actually, what are we going to do? Do we have any like concrete solutions to bring things forward and to make sure that civil society is going to be strong and stay strong? One of the points that everyone can just jump in to the discussion if you want. So don't hesitate if you want to bring up some points. One of my question is, can we actually connect all these civil societies? We've heard from all of you, and some of you said we need to connect. Arthur was talking about the world peace movement, even to counter the whole defense spending that's happening right now. Is it possible to all connect and make this global civil society movement stronger? Or are there too many differences? Anyone?
Yeah, Steph, I think I will try to answer that. We know that the autocrats, they are consistent and they are connected, right? So they plan for the long term. So it's a long-term battle for them. So I think we also need to do the same. We need to be very consistent and we also need to be connected. So to answer your questions, I think yes, it is doable, it is possible to have connection among the movement. And we already seen that for the past, like 5-10 years, and even from a long time ago. But now on how we can, upscale the movement and making sure that we also invite the unusual suspects to be in the movement as well. And we also need to remember that now, you mentioned about the digital aspect, but when we talk about the big tech, actually they're providing the oligarch with the means. So we also need to be very critical with them. Yeah, I think that, I stop there before I talk quite a lot on that.
So you're positive.
Yeah, I'm positive.
It's possible to connect. Anyone else about this? Maybe from DC.
Yeah, I think we have. We talk about technology. I think it's important for us to be clear about what it is that we do, and also I'm a firm believer in not trying to do everything altogether. I think for us in my community, we have a lot. Haiti is called the NGO state, because there are so many NGOs and that are trying to do so many different things that they end up not being effective. And I think if we can be very effective at what it is that we do, and then come together by bringing something very specific to the table that we can all contribute to, and understanding that if you are somebody who focuses on the art like Sanjay is, this is our person that we can rely to talk about specific issues, and not me being a policy and security and then all of a sudden trying to figure out art. And I think that dilutes the message for us. It also weakens us, because on the other side, the folks that are opposing us and actually trying to discredit us use that as a way to say, oh, look at them. They're so disorganized. They don't even know what they're talking about. I think being very clear about it is what we do, and also willing to work in solidarity with others and strengthening others where they lack what we have.
Yeah, maybe Sanjay, you can add to that, because you said in the art world there have been some real concrete examples of how to move forward, how to counter the issues.
I think the key is cross-sector solidarity. I mean, the arts field is not very connected to the human rights field, but I think it's important we don't look at artistic freedom specifically as a human right or as a democratic right. And this illiberal scheme that has been deployed pretty effectively to suppress expression relies on self-censorship. It relies on actors wanting to avoid dialogue to keep their funding, keep their professional livelihood, stay away from online hate. And I think that impulse to self-censor is less when there's a level of cross-sector solidarity, that if an artist creates a work, that they have a community that's supporting them, an artist community and even a legal community. So I know I'm somewhat biased as a human rights lawyer to use legal solutions, but I think it's very important for civic society, civic spaces, whether it's from NGOs to specific artists or actors, to understand what their rights are, that they have actionable rights, and that they're part of an ecosystem that just goes beyond their immediate profession, that will enable them to speak freely and not self-censor.
But you said there's not much connection between the art world and the human rights world, for example, right? Should that not all be more connected, all these different sectors?
We're certainly trying. We're certainly trying. I mean, one of the big things that we're doing right now is the EU Act on Artistic Freedom that we're helping to draft, that builds in principles of independence for funding and independence for managerial appointments in cultural institutions. But I think on the larger side, it requires maybe even museum and civic spaces. Like if you think in the United States, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is very aligned on artistic freedom issues and non-discrimination, to think of themselves as an actor in the space, not just the arts, but also on the actual underlying right to freedom of expression. I'm curious to see the folks that specialize in journalism, how they feel maybe media organizations maybe can even contribute to this solidarity between the civic actors in this space.
Yeah, the problem with the media is, and I speak for me personally, is that it's very difficult to turn from journalists to activists, because then we don't make ourselves very reliable anymore. So we always try to refrain from being part of activism. But if it comes to the media and freedom of expression, of course, this is our field. And then we are allowed to be speaking out, of course. And this is happening right now. We're facing it, all of us. So I think, yeah, that's a very good suggestion. Yeah, my question is, are we positive? Are we positive still? Is there anything positive to add, Arthur, about the future? How
Yes.
are we going to move forward?
So, yeah, I'm an eternal optimist. I believe in possibilities, not impossibilities. We found ourselves here, sometimes human created, so we can undo it. I think really to unite all the diversity of civil society actors, perhaps we need a common civil society global manifesto that just underlines what is most important for civil society, and then it can be reflected and implemented in different diverse ways. The problem is that often we amplify our difference rather than what brings us together. And the other side, they amplify what brings them together. It's not like they're homogeneous. So I think this is a pathway for us to move forward, and of course support those movements that are picking up the courage to fight back with so much determination. We must resource them and support them.
I think you're going to write that manifesto, or not, Arthur? So anyone want to respond? Is anyone else optimistic that that things will get better, that civil society has enough strength to endure, and not only endure, but get better out of it?
Yes, I think I would like to add on to the narrative on partnering beyond the usual suspects. It's not just NGOs to NGOs, but now I'm starting to see NGOs partnering with universities. I'm starting to see NGO partnering with local governments. I was in Berlin during the weekend, where World Liberty Congress partnered with the city of Berlin and finally have some advocacy work without burning a lot of resources. I've also seen partnering with diaspora communities outside of Thailand. So those are the three partnerships beyond the usual suspects that give me optimism and hope.
Thank you. I just got a message that we need to wrap up. I didn't look at the time at all, I'm afraid, but I'm happy that we are ending on a positive note. And I really want to thank all the speakers from all over the globe, the early and the late hours that you stayed with us to have this very energizing and inspiring conversation. And I think we need to take this global movement forward, and I'm counting on Arthur to take the lead. Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, let's take this forward. Thank you.
You.
Thank you, Steph. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this session on civil societies as a force for stability and progress in an increasingly turbulent world. Up next in the Global Town Hall 2025 is our third session titled How to Make the AI Revolution Work for All, a North-South Debate. We begin in a few minutes. Please stay with us.